y'all, welcome back to my channel. I just wanted to pop in really quickly before I start and let you know that this was basically a family project. I went ahead and asked all of my family members and a friend if it was okay to share their stories, and they were totally fine with it, and I went ahead and shared mine as well. This is about my grandpa's haunted house. And for visual effect, I am going to be making the house in The Sims, so you can kind of see what it looks like and sort of see the references in the build from the story as well. So enjoy! My grandpa's St. Paul house has always been where my heart was. My mom had me as a teenager, so naturally my earliest years were spent under my grandparents' roofs. We lived there until I was about 6, then my mom moved on with her life. We moved to the sister city of Minneapolis for a while, when she got married, then subsequently moved back to GP's house. GP is what we called my grandpa. Since the time I was 5, I've known that the house was haunted. Before I even really knew the entire concept of spirits and ghosts, I had an experience with one. His name was Frank, something GP learned after talking to the neighbor who had lived next to the house before GP moved in and had known the tenants from before. They told GP that there was a man who once lived in the house, a lonely man with not much family whose name was Frank. Frank wasn't the healthiest of men, and one day he died in the backyard of a heart attack while he was shoveling or raking. I can't remember which. From that day, my family has believed that Frank was the cause of the odd things that happened to us. These are our stories. I've gathered my family stories from my mom, aunt, uncle, GP, and myself, and will tell them to you in the best order that I can, starting with my mom, aunt, and uncle who lived with GP as teenagers. For context, GP and my grandmother were divorced, and their kids, my mom, aunts, and uncles, would move in and out of his house periodically. I'll start with my mom. When Alyssa was a baby, not even 1, she was sleeping in her crib upstairs. I was downstairs in the living room when I noticed an alarm going off. We'd been living at the house for a year, and none of us had ever heard this alarm because, quite frankly, we didn't have one. Turns out, what I was hearing wasn't an alarm at all. It was an old doorbell on the inside of the house, upstairs on the wall outside of her bedroom. It had been used years before we moved in, before the house was remodeled, and what we knew as the living room was the kitchen previously. The kicker? It was disconnected inside of the wall. I ran and grabbed my baby out of fear and confusion and brought her downstairs with me. The doorbell went off about 4 or 5 times that day, and every time I would go to check it out, it would immediately stop. I called my dad and told him to come home because I was so scared. When he got home, it was silent for about 2 hours. As soon as he went to check it out, it went off again and it just wouldn't stop. You know how sometimes when you hear a scary sound, you get chills up your spine? Imagine that feeling, but continuous because the sound refused to stop. Finally, GP took a hammer and knocked the doorbell off the wall. That's when we noticed something odd. It had no connection. The wires had been cut years ago during the remodel. It was corroded and had not been used in years. There was a night where I fell asleep on the main floor to a movie. For reference, I was in the living room of the house. The living room had a door to the stairs going to the 2nd level, and it was weighted. Every single time you went up the stairs, if you didn't close it carefully, you would always hear it slam behind you. A simple law of physics that would always be enforced. I awakened on the couch a while later, thinking I was dizzy or couldn't focus because I was looking into a fog. It took a second to adjust, but that was when I realized something awful. Everywhere around the fog was clear, shaping the fog into the shape of a man that I was at that moment staring at. I could clearly see the shape of his head, his body, his legs, and his arms, standing over me. When I got to the moment of realizing it was a figure of a person, I panicked. I jumped off the couch and ran to the upstairs door. Flinging it, I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. This is where it gets really weird. When I got to the top of the stairs, I noticed that I didn't hear the door slam behind me. But that just wasn't possible. When I looked behind me, distraught with fear of being chased, my heart sank. The door, which should have been shut by now due to its unquestioning weight, was still open. It wasn't stuck. No. It was half open, like someone caught it when I threw it and was holding it, watching me from below. But nobody was there. I booked it to my sister's room and told her how freaked out I was and that I had to sleep with her. About a minute after I got into bed, I heard that door slam shut. I only hoped that it wasn't because it followed me up. Uncle Joe. I was home alone for the weekend. Everyone else was at the cabin, a yearly family trip we took every summer. I think this was around 1999. I was watching TV in the living room. It was about midnight. A pretty standard evening before going to bed. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a noise coming from the door, like it was being pushed. I dismissed the noise at first, thinking it was the TV. But that was when I noticed something disturbing. The knob was turning back and forth, as if someone was trying to open it, but was too weak. I included a video to demonstrate what it sounded like. This went on for about 15 seconds. A year's worth of time when you're scared. I got up and slowly reached out for the knob, not sure if I really wanted to know what was on the other side. Just as my fingers finally touched the doorknob, I jumped at the sound of a phone ringing from the kitchen. I ran to the kitchen to answer it, and when I did, there was nobody there. Frightening in and of itself, but hey, at least the door was quiet now. There was another time, after knowing the shit that goes on in that house, that I provoked Frank from my bed when I lived in the basement. I said, do something, make a noise, stuff like that. There were a few pull chain lights down there that exposed bare bulbs. Right after I finished my sentence, I heard the chain start swinging back and forth, scraping against the light bulb, like someone hit it. Okay, thanks. Now stop! Aunt Shannon. So I'll start with the first time I found out about Frank. I just moved in with GP when your mom had just first moved out. I was 15. GP would wake up at 4 a.m. every morning to go to work. So one night I was up late talking to my cousin on the phone and smoking a cigarette in my room, which was at the top of the stairs on the second level. I was sitting on the floor right next to the door. It was 3 a.m. when I heard footsteps dragging up the stairs and a loud pound on my bedroom door. I remember saying to my cousin, "Ah, shit, my dad is mad because I probably woke him up talking to you." I told her to hold on so I could open the door and apologize to him. I reached up and I turned the handle. When the door opened, nobody was there. Shocked, I casually shut the door and put the phone back up to my ear and said, "Oh my God, nobody's at the door." Needless to say, I was pretty freaked out. The next day, I told GP about this, and he laughed and told me all about Frank and the story about the doorbell. After that night, at 3 a.m. every morning, he would run up and down the stairs and knock on my door. He did it even worse when I had friends over. He made my friend Carissa cry when she slept over, and he, as usual, ran up and down the stairs come 3 a.m. She said she would never sleep over again, and she didn't. GP and I. Like I said in the beginning, I lived at GP's house until I was about 6, moved away with my mom for a while, and then moved back in with him when I was 15. I have one story from when I was 5, before I even knew what ghosts were. For some reason, I was looking for my mom, but I couldn't find her anywhere. She wasn't in the front room, she wasn't in the basement, she wasn't in the kitchen, she wasn't in the living room. Looking back, she may have been using the bathroom through the kitchen, but I didn't know that at the time. I decided to look for her upstairs. Her room was the furthest one from the stairwell. There was the room at the top of the stairs, the bathroom next to it, and another room that acted as a passageway to hers. It was a fun maze of a house due to the way it was remodeled before we moved in. 5-year-old me skipped all the way to her door. At the time, there was a child protection knob, but I had already figured that one out. All I had to do was squeeze 2 of the sides together to twist the knob from underneath the contraption. When I finally got the knob to turn, I swung the door open, and before looking, I just called out, "Mommy!" That's when I saw him. Across the doorway, on the other side of the room, staring at me, and sitting on my mom's bed was not my mom. It wasn't a man either. It was a blurred shape of one. It was sitting, but I could tell even when it was sitting that it was tall. If he stood, he would tower over my child body. I stood there for a second in total shock, unable to move. I snapped out of it when, still staring at me, the shape tilted its head, and a deep voice said, "Mommy," as if it didn't understand the word. I screamed in terror, bolted to the stairs, and ran down them as fast as I possibly could. I can remember thinking how I wished I could run backwards because I felt his presence behind me the entire time. That was the only time I ever saw him, but I heard him all the time after that. For GP, he always played mind games on him. I remember once GP had a camera full of pictures that he took while he was in Mexico. He placed it on the coffee table and left it for a few minutes. When he came back, the camera was gone. He was really stressed out about that one because he lost his memories along with the money it took to afford a new camera. He always joked about it though, like it was amusing. He'd look up at the ceiling and say stuff like, "Damn you, Frank, you just outed me $50. If he ever had a really scary story, he never told me about it, though I am curious about what he went through. We'll never know since he died in 2015. But my mom can confirm that he would always say that when he died, he would give Frank a piece of his mind for haunting our family. When I moved back in at the age of 15, I started out living in the room at the top of the stairs. This was one of the lowest times in my life. I felt negative energy every time I was there. My depression hit the hardest. Going to school was hard. I was ostracized and teased at school. Then I would come home and fear what I would hear when I got to my room. I heard the footsteps running up and down the stairs. I heard scraping against the walls at night. I heard knocks on my door with nobody there. But he never showed himself to me again after the first time when I was a child. When I was 18, my friend moved in with us. She had my mom's old room, the one I saw the ghost in. This room was a hot spot. There was something about it. The energy just seemed stronger there. It was an add-on to the house after all, and I have a theory that Frank died underneath that particular part of the house. Anyway, when I posted that I was collecting stories from my family, she messaged me with hers. Nona. There were a few instances, but I'm not sure I remember all of them. We'll start with this one though. One night, I was laying in bed. I had work early in the morning, and I was getting really agitated because Alyssa's cat kept jumping onto my bed, rubbing against my leg. It wouldn't leave, so I got up in a haze and opened the door to tell her to get her cat because it was bothering me and I just really needed some sleep. That's when I saw the cat on her lap. I've been startled by the bedroom door, which was weightless and only moved by force, slamming by itself. I've watched the knob move and the door open on its own with nobody on the other side, and my mom even had to buy me a new TV for graduation because my old one sparked up and blew out of nowhere in that house. On another night, I was cleaning and heard a female voice from the outside of mine. I called out for Alyssa. No answer. Already freaked out due to the house's record, I called her on the phone. She answered and I asked if she was home. She said no. No other females lived there at the time. The last stories. A few extra occurrences happened in the months leading up to me leaving for my first apartment. Nona had moved out, and I took my mom's old room afterwards. My cat would always act strange when she was in there with me. She would constantly look up at the ceiling. Her eyes would dart wildly like someone was teasing her with a laser and she was zoned in on it. Mind you, she has never done this since we moved out. One day I was talking to my friend on the phone in bed. My cat was bothering me, jumping on the bed and licking my face, and after a while of me trying to get her off the bed and her persisting by jumping back on it, I eventually just locked her out of my room by setting her down in the outer room and closing my door. I thought nothing of it and went back over to my bed to finish my conversation. A minute later, my cat startled me by jumping on my bed again. I shot my eyes to the door, which was wide open now. I know I closed it all the way. I was dead set on locking her out. It was then that I heard a female voice outside of my room, softly crying. I peeled the phone away from my ear, unaware of what my friend was saying on the other end. I hadn't clued them in on what was happening yet, as I was still in shock. No females lived at the house at the time, except for me. The sobs were getting louder, like she was a few feet away. I didn't know what else to do, so at the very least I wanted to close the door again, but I didn't know who or what was on the other side crying. As I finally got the courage to stand back up, the crying was gone. Now there was just dead silence. I told my friend what happened. They thought I was messing with them because of how calm I was. Honestly, I'd just gotten used to it by then. One night I was on my way back from the movies with some friends when GP called me. He asked if I was home. Confused, I said no, that I was still in the car on the way. He said that was odd because he thought he heard me crying outside. Mind you, this was around 10 p.m. He said he went out to investigate, but as soon as he stepped out, the crying stopped. This was just within days of me hearing the crying in my room. I don't know why, but towards the end of us living there, somehow a female presence made itself known to us, and she was always crying. When I was 21, I moved out because GP's health was deteriorating due to alcoholism. No matter what I did, hide the bottles, throw them away, talk to him about how I felt, nothing helped because he refused to help himself. Then there was the constant fear about what I would hear or see next in that house. So I left. 6 months later, GP died. It came as a huge shock, and for a while I blamed myself because I thought maybe if I'd stayed with him, he would have somehow lived longer. Maybe I could have done something. But I kept my feelings to myself because my mom was completely devastated. The house was sold to the bank because he honestly just didn't take very good care of it. And luckily the locks hadn't been changed right away because I needed to grab a few personal items from my apartment that I'd left there. When my husband and I walked through the house, it was eerily dark and cold, like a ghost of the house I knew growing up. I soaked it all in, all the memories that I'd never be able to visit again because he was gone. I still struggle with his death, to be honest. But I felt like I was being watched the whole time we were there, which I didn't mention to my husband because it was just the vibe that you felt at the house and nothing new. While I was gathering stories, my uncle mentioned how he went back after GP's death too to take the fridge from the kitchen. I didn't know about this. He was alone and struggled getting it through the kitchen door, which was just a wide frame of a doorway. He managed to get it in his truck, and when he went back inside to close up, he saw a children's ball in the kitchen doorway, right there in the middle. There was no way he could have gotten the fridge over it. He would have stepped on it or fallen had it been there before. He said, "Well, whoever you are, Frank or Dad, thanks for saying hello." And then he left. But the weirdest part of all of this is months later, my mom and aunt spoke to a psychic who told them that GP hadn't moved on yet. She said, he's still staying with the boy, who we assume is my little brother who has Down syndrome. GP watched my brother every other weekend for the last few years of his life. Before he was cremated, my mom tried to gently tug on my brother into looking at GP, but he would just look at the floor, shake his head, and refuse. We think GP stays with David to keep him at peace. But the psychic also said GP hangs out with someone in the afterlife, an older man. They spent weeks trying to decipher who the psychic was talking about until they told me about what she said, and I immediately gasped and said, "Frank!" Their eyes lit up. "Oh my God, you're right!" My aunt was stunned. To this day, I firmly believe that when GP isn't with my brother, he's hanging out in the afterlife with Frank, haunting the house with the same ghost that haunted him. To the people who live there now, good luck. Hey y'all, Lyssa here. Thanks guys for sticking it out for my story. I hope it wasn't too creepy, but it's all true. These are all stories from my family and from me and GP, who hopefully I did justice in telling some of his stories because he isn't really around to tell them himself. I hope that you all enjoyed, and please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'd actually be really interested in hearing some of your ghost stories. What are some things that have happened to you or your family members or your friends? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in my very next video. Bye, loves. Mwah.